If something is missing from the fruit, piece of the fruit is missing, that will invalidate the fruit. Certain type of a hole going through and through the fruit would also invalidate the fruit. And what was going on here in the Gemara was discussing if a fruit has certain signs, a sign of a treifa, certain signs, by an animal, if an animal has a hole in its lung, that will invalidate the animal. If you want, you could sit right. Is it better there or there? What's better for you? Good? Good, okay. If an animal has a hole in its lung, that hole in the lung will invalidate an animal. Because an animal that will die within a year is called a treifa. A treifa, and the Torah says you can't eat a treifa, even though you're going to slaughter the animal, right? You slaughter the animal that has you slaughtered an animal, and you found that in its lung there was a puncture, a hole in its lung. That animal's not kosher. So the Gemara is saying here, if an etrog has certain signs, if something happens to the etrog, which would similarly happen to the inside of an animal, would that invalidate the etrog or not invalidate one atom, or not invalidate the etrog? That is the question. And the Gemara wants to know what type of defect, what happened to the etrog, which is similar to what happened to the animal that we didn't already discuss, because we already discussed a hole in the etrog, a hole in the etrog. So that's already discussed already. We already discussed if the etrog is cracked. We already said about what the law is. Similarly, if the lung of an animal is cracked. So what is the case that we're talking about that we wanted to know what the law is, right, Adam? That was a discussion that we had yesterday. So the Gemara, if you look on the Gemara on 36a1 on the bottom, so we said that the question that we want to know about this etrog, if it has something similar to the story of an animal, and what's the story of the animal that this is similar to? It's a case of an animal, a reyesh and nishbecha kekito. If there is a lung that there was the lung has bronchial tubes, the air pipes, and air cells, and flesh. And these are all contained within the two layers of the membrane. So if the flesh by the lung, certain of the flesh dissolved, but the membrane stayed intact, so that animal, the fact that the membrane stayed intact, the lungs are intact, might be missing some of the flesh, that remains still a kosher animal. The animal's not going to die as a result of some of that flesh by the lung dissolve. So the question here is, what is the status of an etrog, of a similar situation? And the Gemara is going to identify how is this case similar to an etrog? So the Gemara said, Amar Rava, and Rava says, Hu de kaima, the case of the animal where some of the meat by the lungs of the flesh dissolve, is talking about the kaima symphona, that the bronchial tubes of the animal are still intact. But holokaima symphona, but if the bronchial tubes are not intact, treifa. The animal would be a treifa, because if those bronchial tubes, something happened to it, then the animal is going to die within the year. Morning round. So the Gemara says, Hachamai, what is the law over here? Now we're turning the page to 36a2. So here we have a situation on the etrog. What happened to the etrog? What's the issue with this etrog? So the issue with the etrog here is, what do you say? Right, so inside the etrog, so the way Rashi explains over here, Hachamai, if you have right, that's the case. That's the case that we're talking about here in the etrog. So the etrog, right, great. Like Adam said, the etrog on the outside looks beautiful. It's nice and yellow. Nothing happened to the etrog. It's not rotten. And you know what? Where the seeds of the etrog are in the inside, the seeds are fine. The pockets around the seeds are fine. But outside that area where the seeds are contained, there is an issue over there. And now the question is, would that invalidate the etrog or not? Jack, you hear the case? It's an interesting, complex case. It's not the simple case that the Gemara, you came in a nice, sophisticated case, not the simple case. Good morning, Jaime.
Hi.
Good to see you.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you. So here we're discussing a very interesting case of the Gemara, trying to figure out about a certain etrog, if a certain etrog is kosher or is this etrog not kosher. We're going to see the Gemara is going to talk about an Ethiopian etrog that's black. Is that etrog kosher or not kosher? We're going to be talking about all different types of situations of an etrog, right? We're going to talk about an etrog with a hole. We're going to talk about an etrog, different things, pieces missing in the etrog. We're going to talk about a Siamese etrog, two etrogim growing together. What's the status of that etrog? Is that kosher? If we look at it, is it considered a proper etrog or not? So we're going to get into those cases. Here we're discussing the case that we're talking about over here is when we have it, the etrog, as we know, has a glossy outside, and then after that has a thinner outer area underneath the glossy, and then it's like a thick, fleshy inner rind. And then you have the core that contains the seeds of the etrog. The seeds are in small pockets. So Rava wants to know about a case where the outer rind of the etrog and the outer rind is fine. The outside is fine of the etrog. And the inner and the compartments that enclose the seeds of the etrog are also fine. But much of the flesh in between, some of that's in between over there outside the compartments that contain the seeds, some of that flesh has dissolved. And like Adam said, there's some inner issue with the etrog. And now the question is that inner issue with the etrog? Now, if you'll hold the etrog, Rabbi Fischel said, if you hold the etrog, good morning, you'll hold that etrog, you'll feel maybe movement in the etrog. The etrog is not going to have that proper, the firmness that an etrog usually has. Good morning, Mark. Good morning, Max. So that's the question that we left off yesterday. What's the status with this etrog that has something on the inside? Something's going on inside the etrog. Some of that flesh inside the etrog has dissolved, but the outside is fine. So do we say this? Do we look at this etrog that it's a problem, or do we say, you know what? Listen, you look at the etrog, beautiful on the outside. The fact that something inside is some of the flesh of the etrog inside has dissolved, that doesn't ruin the etrog. Just like when it comes to an animal, if by its lungs, if the bronchial tubes are intact, and even though some of the flesh has dissolved over there, by the lung, but we say as long as the lung is running, it's the bronchial tubes are intact, the animal is not going to die. So that type of defect is not enough to make the animal a not kosher animal. So too, this defect, so to speak, that's imperfection of the etrog. Jack, am I clear? This imperfection of what's going on inside the etrog, that some of it has dissolved inside, is not enough, perhaps, to ruin the etrog. That is the question that Rava wanted to know. So now, what's the question? I mean, the obvious you could say, you know what? If you found by the animal remains kosher. Why shouldn't we say the same thing is by etrog, that the etrog should also be kosher? So the Gemara says, we have 36:8.2. There's a distinction in the case of the etrog compared to the case of the lung. And the question is that distinction enough of a distinction? All cases might not be equal, right? And you say a border creates on an apple, you say a border creates on an orange. They're different cases, but they're same. They both grow from a tree. You say a border creates on both fruits, even though they're different cases. But here, because there's enough similarities between the tree of an orange tree and an apple tree that in both cases you make a border creates. But here, there's going to be some distinction. That question is this distinction, and we're going to identify distinction, would that create a change of law? Now, what's the distinction? So the Gemara says, here, what's the law? Because we're on the top of 36A2 max. Dilma, Katam, when you talk about the lung, and some of the flesh inside by the lung has dissolved, the Hasam the Loshalit Ba'avira. There's no air, the air that's making from the outside. There's no, as they say, external atmosphere that's having an impact on it. Everything on the inside, nothing is changing from the lung, because the lung on the inside, yes, some of the meat has dissolved, but what's going on? But the outside being exposed to the outside air is not going to have any more effect or less effect on this lung. There's nothing here that's happening with this lung of this animal who some of the flesh by the lung has dissolved. The air, the atmosphere, is not going to have any more negative effect on this lung. However, but the etrog, with something's going on, negative going on the inside, and now it's going to be exposed to the ear. So but here, Dilma Hakam Delo Shalab Bavira, over there where the atmosphere doesn't make any impact, the outside is not going to make an impact on the lung that's inside on this flesh that was dissolved inside the lung, Sahadabari. So therefore, that flesh has the ability to regenerate. That flesh that dissolved in the lung will heal, will grow back, or get stronger again. However, of halacha, but in the case of the etrog, so what happened? The concern is eventually, because there's some inner issue with the etrog, the inner issue that some of that flesh on the inside etrog has dissolved, and the etrog is exposed to the air, the shalab ba'avira. So then sruche masrachat. So what's going to happen eventually? This etrog is going to get rotten, and since it's going to get rotten, it's not going to get better. It's only going to, as time goes on, it's going to get worse. So do we say at this point, do we look at the etrog and say that it's not hadar, it's not beautiful, or perhaps Odilma Loshna? Or do we say, listen, at this point, either you could say at this point it didn't rot yet, it's still intact at this point, so therefore that is good enough, and we could say that at this point you could go ahead and use this etrog. So that's the Gemara's question. So the Gemara says Toshma. So the Gemara wants to come and prove what's the law by this etrog, that some of the flesh on the inside of the etrog has dissolved, and now it's like mushy on the inside. You'll hold the etrog, you'll feel there's something going on in the etrog. Maybe if you move it around, you could even hear some movement of a little liquid going on in the etrog as a result of the dissolving of this little flesh inside the etrog. So what's the halacha? Toshma. What's the law? So the Gemara brings a braita, and from the following braita, it's going to try to answer the question. What do we find? We find on record the following cases. Etrog tapuach, an etrog that has blown up. Maybe it came in contact with water. You know what happens sometimes, what water does to things? Get water on your suit, you get water on certain things. It could blow up, you get water on the fruit. It could go ahead and it could swell up. If an etrog swelled up, or saruach, or an etrog got saruach, but the Gemara's got saruach means there's certain rottenness to it. We'll see, the Gemara will explain what the saruach means. Or kavush. What happens if you pickle the etrog? You place the etrog in vinegar for 24 hours. you pickled the etrog, or you placed it in mustard. And what's the status of the etrog? We're going to say that etrog is no good. Ushaluk. Or if you cooked it with a lot of you cooked it very well cooked. You cooked the etrog in boiling hot water. That also would invalidate the etrog. Shaluk, usually shaluk means very well cooked. That shaluk means when you cook something. Some say it doesn't mean any amount of cooking would invalidate the etrog. So let's see over here one of the commentaries. What do you say? Okay, so if you did this to the etrog or kushi, an etrog that is black, so either means it came from Ethiopia or a black etrog, lavan, or if an etrog is white, and a white etrog, umenumar, or if an etrog is spotted, it has other colors, not the natural green, yellow. It has some other colors that would make it pasul. The etrog would be pasul. This is not called. This is not the etrog that the Torah was talking about. Yes, yes. What's your question? Right, leopard is different spotted, different. I mean, I presume it's referring. It's we use it in that term. We use it as. Okay, we can look into that word, but if it has multi colors, that like we learned in the Gemara before, if you have a red color and a yellow color, that multicolors takes away from the beauty of the etrog. So obviously, white is not beautiful. The white color of the etrog is not the beautiful. It's a lack of beauty. Black color of the etrog is a lack of beauty. So these would invalidate and obviously the Gemara is holding by pickling the etrog, by cooking the etrog, you have changed the etrog. It's not the etrog of the Torah. It has been alterated. So that would be that would be invalid. Now, so all these cases we said is pasul, and all because they're lack of beauty. Okay, etrog kikadur. If you have an etrog that's round like a ball, like a round ball, and it's interesting. Tosfos says very interesting that Tosfos says it's made like a leather ball that the girls play with. They're playing ball is going back for a very long time, ball playing, and we're talking about a ball. It's made like a round like a ball. That's also pasul. That's also lack of beauty. How do you like that, Mark? The girls were playing ball back in the old days. Play ball, right? So that is it says Tosfos says that they would that the words of Torah, the words of Torah, the words of the Chachamim are compared to a ball that you go ahead and you throw the same way the girls would throw the ball. They would have a catch. They had a catch. Like we have catch today, they had a catch. Maybe they didn't play basketball the way we play basketball today, but they threw the ball to each other. So too, the Torah, you throw the Torah, you throw the words of Torah, mouth to mouth. I talk to you, Torah, you talk to me, Torah, we're throwing to each other. We're having a catch. How do you like that, Mr. Haber? We're having a catch. I throw you, Torah, then you have a comment, you have a question, you ask, you say your own Torah back. That's what that is the. It's like the words of the rabbis. I like a ball. So that's the very fascinating idea. What do you say, Jaime? You like that? I thought that's very interesting. Okay,
Great.
so v'yesh omrim, and some say af hatiyum, two etrogim that were. By the way, the Gemara we have a Gemara for. Oh, it's the wrong one. Two etrogim that are attached to each other. The Siamese etrogim, they grew at Siamese. So some say that's also invalid. Some say that's also a lack of beauty. It's not one. It's not It's some. It's not the normal type of etrog because they both grew together, Siamese, so to speak. Etrog habusa, and some say the problem is there's a different problem with the etrog that grows Siamese because the Torah says to take one etrog, three, singular. And if you take this etrog that has a double, it's 2 and 1, it's like you're taking two etrogim. It's not like you're taking one. The other opinion holds no, it's kosher. It's because it grew as it's still one. It grew. The fact that they're attached together, not two separate etrogim. Then you're taking two etrogim, but two that are stuck together. So the other opinion looks at it like it's one etrog and it's kosher. Is that clear, Jack? That's the other opinion. So we have a machloket whether the Siamese etrog is kosher or not kosher. Yeah, you have one pitum on your picture. Yes, you see your picture. There's one pitum on the picture. That's the twin etrog. But the question is the fact that it's attached together might make it. If it had two pitums, would that make the difference?
There were two separate things. Sometimes when they're leaning against each other, they can grow on each other. Because that would be two that became one.
Very good. So Mark is saying if you have two etrogim that grow on a tree and somehow they then attach to each other, that the Gemara will definitely not talk about that. That's definitely two etrogim. We're talking about that it came in with one etrog that grew in this type of fashion. Then the Gemara says, what do you say? Right, like Mark is saying, the picture in the art scroll doesn't even show any pitum at all. Right, but it's not showing two pitums. Now the Gemara says, etrog habotzer, an etrog that's not fully ripe. It's not fully ripe. It's definitely early in its development. Is that etrog, and you took it off the tree when it was pretty early? The question is that etrog kosher or the etrog is not kosher? So the Gemara says there's a machloket. Rabbi Akiva says if it's too early, it's not really a fruit. It's not developed into a fruit. It's still immature. Just sometimes you say a child before he's an adult, he's not a man. You're only a man. It's a child. It's not a man. Yeah, the Torah's obligation mitzvot, you have to be a man. So when you have to reach that state, so if you have to be a fruit, you have to reach a certain level. You're not real. That's not you're still not there. You're still in the development stage. If it was too early, if it was picked early. Now some of the commentators explain. Tosfos learns. We're talking about it is the size of it. There's a question of the Gemara. What is the minimum size of an etrog? So there's a minimum. An etrog has to either be a size of a walnut, that's the first opinion, but the halacha follows the other opinion, be at least the size of an egg. The size of an etrog can't be smaller than an egg. So this, let's say, is at least an egg size, Tosfos learns, but it's still very underdeveloped. You could tell the Gemara doesn't identify exactly what stage of its development, but you could see this etrog was going to grow to be a much larger etrog. It's very premature. What? So that would be fine. Mature and smaller as an egg would be fine. Immature, right? Could be an egg and immature. You ever see? I have in my neighborhood. There's a family that the average size of the sons is around 6'6". 6'6". So when they have children, when their children are 8 years old, they're already the size of a 13-year-old. They're ready, but they're still that they might look big, but they're still not developed. The kids are still young kids, but they have the height of a much older, but they're not. So this etrog is, it could be a size of an egg, but it's still very underdeveloped. That child is still only 10 years old. He might be 6 foot at 10, but he's underdeveloped. You understand what I'm saying? So that's what you say? As a fully ripe, right? So that's a machloket in the Gemara. The Rabbi Akiva posel. Rabbi Akiva says that etrog is no good. You can't take that etrog. It's not really. We'll call it etrog. However, chachamim machshirim. The chachamim say, you know what? That's also called a fruit, even though it's not fully ripened. It reached, but it has the size. We'll go with Tosafos explanation. Has the size of an egg, so that's enough. So that boy that's 6 feet at 10 years old, he's 6 feet. The fact that he's already reached the height, could you get him into the game? What do you mean? He's so young. Could you let him into the game? We're all adults, and he's a 10-year-old boy, but he's 6 feet tall. So he's reached we have to be at least 6 feet to be on the court. So we can let him into the game. Now, Gidlo Bitfus, you went ahead and you took a mold and you placed the mold around the tree around the etrog, while the etrog was young, growing on the tree. You put a mold around it. You wanted to mold the etrog to grow a certain way that you wanted it to grow. Now, if you mold it in a way that it's going to grow the way an etrog should grow, but you wanted it to be cased with certain protection from the elements, that's not a problem, because it grew normally. But here, you know what happened? It was an etrog tree. You put a mold around it, and now it grew a different shape. Is that kosher or not? It's an etrog. It's from the etrog tree, but it's now, it looks like something. It looks like some other type of, it's not the normal look of what an etrog looks like. You hear the question, Jack? So the Gemara says, Gidlo bitfus v'oso kimin beria acheret. It looks like some other species, pasul. It is pasul. It is invalid. So that would invalidate. That's not an etrog. Today in the biomedical field, right? There's a lot of bio, whatever they call it, engineering that they're doing with all different things, but they make it look like the original, right? Their job is they play around with everything, and they're making, in the food industry and other industries, but they make it look like the real thing. Here is there was intervention by the human beings, but here the intervention made it not look like the normal etrog. So there we say that the etrog is pasul. So Rashi says it's invalid because that's not beautiful. That's not the beauty. The Torah spoke about a pri etzadah, a certain beautiful type of fruit, and that an etrog, there has to be a pri etzadah, and that's others say because it's not an etrog. It's not an etrog. Okay, whatever the reason is, it's not good to use such an etrog. But now, after we presented this whole interesting, beautiful Braita, Tani Mihat, but the Braita gave two cases, listed two of these cases that the etrog was no good. If the etrog was tapuach or saruach, either the etrog was, which we translate, tapuach means it was blown up, the etrog swelled, became swollen. You get someone has their foot is swollen, blows up. The etrog blew up on outside, or tsuruach, or there was some sort of something went rotten. Now the question is, where is this tsuruach? What is the case of tapuach, and what is the case of tsuruach? So the Gemara says. So the Gemara says, obviously they're two different cases. Lav doesn't tapuach sounds like it's swelled up on the outside. Something happened on the outside of the etrog. And tsuruach means that something went down on the inside of the etrog, which sounds like that something's wrong on the inside, which what the Gemara is suggesting the case that this is the case we've been looking for. What's the law if you have an etrog that everything's all right on the outside, but something inside is going wrong, that some of the flesh inside the etrog has dissolved? So the Gemara says, that some part is rotten on the inside, and yet we see the brighter states that seruach or tapuach is no good. It's not a good etrog. So this we want to suggest that this is an answer to our question. If it's if we're correct in our analysis, in our understanding of this brighter, when the brighter says seruach or tapuach is pasul, if we understand, we're suggesting that the case is a case where there's something went wrong on the inside. So, and that is the case we've been looking for. That's what the Gemara wants to say. We found the case, and we think this is the match. And to that, the Gemara says no proof that this is the match, because the Gemara didn't see what, if they're both on the outside, the part that Gemara wouldn't repeat the same case. So the Gemara is thinking that this case of this Braita of Saruach is the case where something went wrong inside, and the outside is intact. That the Gemara says low. The Gemara says not necessarily is that the case, and therefore you cannot prove your point. But what does the Gemara say? Good morning. How is the Gemara going to explain the two cases? So the Gemara says low. Edi v'edi, both cases, the issue is on the outside. The issue is on the outside. However, edi v'edi mimechutz v'lo kasha. And yet you can't, and yet there's no question, why do we need two cases if this issue on the outside of the etrog? Because one is talking about the tapach afagav de lo sarach. The outside swelled up, right? Let's say water came in contact with the etrog, and I don't recommend people should run your etrog, put the etrog underwater. Maybe you could put your lulav into a thing of water, maybe. But we don't recommend you should keep the etrog in water, because the etrog coming in contact with water could blow up could swell the etrog. So that the case of the tapuach is when the etrog swelled up as a result of, let's say, water. But it didn't rot. It didn't start rotting. The etrog is still not. It looks. The color. It's not rotting at all. Good morning, but it blew up. Vaha the sarach. And the other case is, the second case is, good morning, Stephen. Good morning. So I called it David. Forgive me. Okay. Vaha, the next case, at least I quote myself. Vaha, there's a halacha that if you say something and you catch yourself within toch kedei dibur, you said the wrong bracha, you change within right away. It's like, that's the proper catch. Vaha, the sarach afagav de lo tafach. The second case is when it started rotting on the outside, but it didn't swell up. It didn't blow up. And therefore, that's what the case is talking about, that both cases, rotting on the outside or swelling on the outside, each of those cases are no good. But not necessarily do we know what the law would be if everything is beautiful on the outside. It didn't blow up on the outside. It's not swelling on the outside. The etrog is not swelling. It looks beautiful. It's not rotting on the outside. There's no change, no rotting issues on the outside. But there's something going on inside the etrog. Morning, Aaron. Something's going on inside the etrog. There is a dissolving of some of the flesh inside the etrog. What would be the halacha in that case? We have no proof to that question. So the Gemara does not answer, remains unanswered in the Gemara. So obviously in the halacha, we'll address what the halacha should be. The question would be, so on the surface, how would we look at this without taking out the halacha? The question would be, if this invalidation would be a biblical invalidation, meaning if we say this would be a lack of beauty, if this inside of the flesh of the the etrog, something inside dissolved and started rotting inside the etrog, if that would be a biblical invalidation, and now there's a question, is there, and we're not sure if this would invalidate the etrog or not, so then there's a general suffix d'oraita l'chumrah. If something is not answered, if it's not, and it's a question in the biblical law, so you have to be strict, and you would say, don't use such an etrog. But if we say this invalidation would be a rabbinic invalidation, so then you would say suffix d'Rabbanan. The rabbis say if there's a suffix, if there's a question on a rabbinic law, the rabbis say then you could be lenient. The rabbis, of course, rabbinic law is extremely important. The Torah says follow the rabbis, but the rabbis themselves say if you have a doubt if there's a question, if let's say if I don't. I mean, let's say I want to know, can I use this? I mean, obviously, if I have something better, let me use something that's better, but if I have this etrog in front of me, and it's a rabbinic, it's a question, and it's not clear, there's a suffix, there's a doubt whether rabbinically this would be good or not. So the rabbis say if there's a doubt in a rabbinic law, you could be lenient, and you could use it. Like, let's say the rabbis say, see, we have an obligation to say a bracha on food. Right? It's a rabbinic obligation. Before you eat, you have to say a bracha. The biblical obligation is to say birkat hamazon after you have bread. If you have satiated with bread, you have to say birkat hamazon. Before you eat, you have to say a bracha. So that's a rabbinic mandate, a rabbinic obligation. It's a serious obligation. But what about if a person is not sure if I said a bracha on a food or not? I'm not sure if I said a shahakol. I'm not sure if I said hadama. So we say, the rabbis say, if you're not sure, in something that we tell you to do, you be lenient. You could be lenient. Now sometimes you can be strict. By a bracha, you can't be strict because maybe you're saying Hashem's name in vain if you don't need to say the bracha. So therefore, so that would be how the rabbis told you how to act when it comes to rabbinic law. I always like to quote a beautiful Gemara in Brachot. The Gemara says women are obligated to say birkat hamazon, right? Women, the Mishnah says in Brachot, the lady has bread, she has to say birkat hamazon. She doesn't get, there's no free pass for the lady. I'm a woman, I don't need to say birkat hamazon. No, you are obligated to say birkat hamazon. And the Gemara has a question, is the lady's obligation in birkat hamazon biblical or rabbinic? That's what the Gemara wants to know. Is she obligated from the Torah to say birkat hamazon, or is she obligated rabbinic? And the Gemara has a question that so the commentators explain why should ladies be different than the men? Because you have to eat. So there are reasons, but the Birkat Hamazon talks about Britcha, about that Britcha shechasamta b'serenu, Brit Milah. Women have no mitzvah Brit Milah. There are other reasons given that the Gemara has a question of whether women are obligated on a Torah level or not. That's what the Gemara has a question. They're definitely obligated. The only question is, rabbinically or biblically? So you know what the Gemara shoots back? The Gemara says, what's the difference? What's the difference whether they're obligated rabbinically or biblically? You got to do it. That's the attitude we have to have when it comes to rabbinic law or biblical law. The attitude have to do it. The Gemara says, you know what the difference is? Can a woman say birkat hamazon for the man? If you and your wife ate together, can she say birkat hamazon for you? If she's obligated like you both have biblical obligations, she could say the birkat hamazon for you. I don't recommend she should go in front of a whole shul and say birkat hamazon for the whole crowd, but in the privacy of a home, the wife would be able to say birkat hamazon for her husband, no problem, if she has an equal obligation, right, David? But if she's not obligated on a Torah level, she has a rabbinic obligation, and you have a biblical obligation. A rabbinic obligation cannot cover someone who's obligated biblically. So that's the Gemara's explanation of why it's important to know what's the difference whether she's obligated rabbinically or obligated biblically. The Gemara does not answer the question. And also in halacha, it's called a Succah d'dina. It's called a question of law. And therefore, we will not have a woman say birkat hamazon for a man. You should know, when it comes to kiddush on Shabbat, the lady is obligated in kiddush like a man. So technically, Friday night, I got to be careful what I say, but Friday night, in the privacy of someone's home, you have an older couple and the man has difficulty saying Kiddush, right? It's hard for him to say Kiddush. Of course, traditionally the man says the Kiddush, but technically a man has difficulty saying Kiddush Friday night in the privacy of home. Technically, a woman can say the Kiddush for the husband. I'm not advertising it, but you understand, you have to know, it's important to know what the law is, to how to wheel and deal in different situations, what comes up. So that's just an interesting thing I wanted to share with everybody. I want to wish everyone a beautiful day. Such a beautiful crowd on the screen, off the screen. I want to wish everyone all the best. Be back tomorrow. And we welcome Jack has come today. Jack of Shechiona
Thank you.
Have a great day, everybody. Thank you. All the best. Mark, how you like that?